I've become so cautious over what I listen to. Podcasts, music, movies, motivational speeches, even, are all engaged with vigilantly. Because I've really started to notice a pattern with the things that I've been consuming visually and audibly over the years. Most creators aren't creating because they just want to share an idea. It seems like the goal is to shape your ideas into their own. They want influence, they want agreement, they want access to how you think. And once they have that, they have a level of control over you. They can get you to do, say, think, and buy whatever they desire.
I bought army pants and flip-flops.
What's up? I'm DeMarcus, and in my last video, I discussed Jay-Z's recent GQ cover story and the psychological manipulation behind what we tend to call sorcery or witchcraft. It's not always theatrical rituals, it's often the subtle manipulation of the will. At its core, witchcraft is really just about influence. It's about the shaping of belief, often through subtle, indirect means. It's not always spells and potions, although that is a very real thing in witchcraft. Most of the time, it's simply just through narrative. And this isn't even a new idea. I'm currently reading The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, and there is a character, Lord Henry, who is unapologetic in how he desires to influence others. He becomes fascinated with this young man, Dorian Gray, not just because of his beauty, but because of how young and impressionable he is. And he takes it upon himself to model Dorian Gray in his likeness. Like, he literally says that he wants to dominate him, not physically, but mentally, spiritually even. He does it through conversation, through the sharing of his ideas, through narrative. At one point, Lord Henry even says to influence a person is to give him one's own soul. He does not think his natural thoughts. He even suggests that at its core, influence is immoral, because to influence someone is to essentially replace what would have naturally formed in them with something that came from someone else. And that's exactly what he does. Like, he introduces Dorian to a philosophy of hedonism, of selfishness, youthful pleasure above all, and Dorian becomes completely consumed by this philosophy. Like, literally obsessed with it, so much so that he wanted to sell his soul for eternal youth so that he can live in these passions without remorse. Not because he discovered this ideology on his own, but because the philosophy was essentially planted in his mind. Now, in Dorian Gray, the influence is very obvious, it's smack dab in your face, but what's more dangerous is when it isn't. One of the most effective ways to influence someone's mind is actually just through storytelling. Because when you read a story, you don't argue with it. You're not trying to prove a point of what's right and what's wrong. You're just entering the story. You're lowering your guard and your defenses. You empathize with the characters. You internalize the storyline. And you start connecting dots subconsciously. And before you realize it, the ideas aren't just on the page anymore, they're actually in you, whether you disagree with them or not. I saw this recently when I was reading Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. And when I finished this book, something did not sit right with me about the subtext of the story, which was odd because people have been talking about Steinbeck on TikTok ad nauseum at this point, and nobody has ever brought this up, that there is an undertone in this book specifically, which is subtle but consistent. This comparison of a black man, a mentally handicapped man, and an old useless dog, all circling this idea that once something or someone is no longer useful, it should be put down, like thrown away and discarded. Even the puppies in the story are talked about like, oh, they can just be drowned. And this idea actually has a name, which is eugenics. Now, I will say, to be fair, there's no direct evidence that Steinbeck himself was a eugenicist or held onto these beliefs himself. At least none that I can find. And please believe, once I finished this book, that was definitely the first thing I looked up. But eugenics was actually just a widely accepted ideology in that era, especially in academic spaces like Stanford University, which was Steinbeck's alma mater. So for me, the question becomes, did he naturally believe this ideology, or did he simply absorb it and pass it on through story? And more importantly, how many other people read that book and absorbed that ideology too, unknowingly even? I definitely brought this point up on TikTok and was met with a lot of resistance and backlash.
Why am I getting so much
I know, I'm
backlash?
saying this really isn't about accusing every author of witchcraft or nefarious manipulation of the mind. It really is about understanding how influence works. Because writing, reading, storytelling, these are some of the most effective ways to bypass the conscious mind and plant something deeper. Some of the most renowned novels have inspired revolutions, ended oppression, and inspired self actualization. And I really think that this is why Jesus taught in parables. Like the disciples were so confused on why he was constantly speaking to them in parables and riddles. And he didn't just give information, he told stories rooted in the culture of ancient Israel so that people can connect dots subconsciously, so that truth could settle into the hearts of those who were ready to receive it. It would stick. It would stick with them. But here's the tension. If truth can be planted that way with the intention of good, so can deception. And that's what brings me to The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, because I've read this book twice now. Once at 24 and once recently in February. The first time I actually loved the book. Like I remember being obsessed with it, in fact. The second time, my spirit completely rejected it. It was actually very uncomfortable to get through. In January, I came across a book club on TikTok. I'm Him, Books and Bars, a space for men trying to grow, think deeper, and be more intentional in 2026. Great. I was with it. The Alchemist was the next on the list for February, and I brought it immediately because, again, I remembered how much I enjoyed the book the first time I read it. And I knew I got something from it, something that inspired me at the time, and that's what I felt like I needed going into this new year. So I got it. I finished the book in the day, but this time something was off. Like when I say the saxophones were getting louder and louder, that conviction had me physically sick. So much so, I had to go back and annotate all of the lines that were making me so uneasy, and I had to really think about them. I realized this book isn't just telling a story, it's actually teaching an ideology, one that completely contradicts my own worldview. I did what I should have did the first time, and I stopped to research the author. And what I found about this dude changed my entire perspective. It changed all the context about this book. Like it literally changed everything. Paulo Coelho isn't just a novelist. He is deeply involved in occult philosophy. Like he studied the teachings of one of the most infamous occultists, Aleister Crowley, whose central belief was do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, which directly contradicts Jesus' instructions to deny yourself. Paulo was a part of something called the Alternative Society, which was a group that experimented with drugs and black magic and esoteric spirituality. And he even co wrote music promoting these ideas in the songs. And this wasn't just music that he made in his mom's basement, these were actually very popular songs in Brazil in the 70s. Later, he described being initiated into a mystical order, one that blended Catholicism with esoteric practices, which included meditation and spirit conjuring. And this was actually all before he even decided to write. Like, in fact, he was inspired to write after his initiation into this mystical order, which inspired one of his first novels, The Pilgrimage. All of this is detailed in a New Yorker profile on him titled The Magus. Magus, a practitioner of magic, someone who understands influence at its core. Even in the profile, Paulo describes meeting a fan from Ireland who says that a satellite told her to go to him and in front of him. And he responded, okay, we can do that, but first, let's have a coffee. And as this young lady went to sit down to drink this coffee, he stood up. And then what he says is, he stood up to demonstrate that he could control her. This literally sounds just like Lord Henry in the Picture of Dorian Gray. Like, he wants to dominate people. He wants to influence them and control them. So now circle back to the Alchemist. Santiago, who is the protagonist in this story, is a shepherd boy who at one point was studying to be a priest. So there's already a Christian foundation in the story. There's actually a lot of biblical language and references all throughout the book, which is why I think I was so comfortable reading it the first time. Like, it really got me to lower my defenses. Like, Santiago even prays to Jesus in one point in the story. But underneath all of that is a completely different system. It's not preaching reliance on God, but it's pushing reliance on omens, signs, the universe, finding your personal legend. And for all intents and purposes, these are very real spiritual things, but it's under what spirit is it inspired by is the real question. This book is subtly training readers to look away from God and look toward creation. Romans 1:25 says people exchange the truth of God for a lie and worship the created things rather than the creator. That's exactly what this book does. All it takes is a little poison in the Kool-Aid to do the trick. And the heresy in this book is so subtle that even the most devout Christians could be misled and thrown off. And that is if they aren't thrown off by the title in the first place, because for some reason the title didn't bother me like it bothers some Christians. I don't know why. Maybe it's because I didn't fully understand what alchemy was at the time of me first reading the book. But I was one of those seemingly devout Christians. Like, I didn't catch any of these things the first time. When I first read The Alchemist, I was living in Los Angeles. I had just lost my younger brother to suicide a year before, and I moved to LA trying to get a fresh start. Like, I just was so convinced that my big break and my meaning and whatever I was looking for was going to be found in LA. And for a while, life was kind of working out. Like, I moved there from Virginia. I had never been to California before. I didn't know anybody there. I had $1,500, two suitcases, and 2 weeks booked in a hostel, and I had to figure it out. And by month two of me being in LA, I had a job, I had a new apartment. A lot of my best friends from college started to move to LA. So things were kind of like falling into place. But after a while, my luck ran out and things were starting to dry up. And I was sitting around looking up at God, like, all right, bro, like, what's going on? Like, what are we doing? And I think my desperation led me into all of these books and all of these self-help books. Everybody was ranting about The Alchemist. And I don't remember a thing about reading the book other than the fact that it made me feel like motivated. It got me inspired. And it actually affected my behavior. But the crazy thing is, I realize now looking back, like after I read this book, I started taking trips up to Silver Lake where the hippies live. I started browsing through all the occult stores and buying crystals, attempting to dabble with spiritual practices and things that I didn't have the slightest clue about. And one day I had told my coworker I was feeling a little lost and stuck, and she actually told me to visit her spirit guide. But so what's crazy is when I went to see the spirit guide lady, it was like literally a page right out of the book. And I only remember this in retrospect. Like, I was reading the book, like, whoa, this literally mirrors that experience. In the first few pages of The Alchemist, this Christian boy Santiago stumbles upon this gypsy who reads his palm, and he was thrown off and very uneasy about it at first because, again, he comes from Christianity. He understands the taboo behind palm reading and, all of this like sorcery. And even though he was uneasy about this palm reading at first, he became intrigued after getting his palm read and this lady telling him where he could go to find his treasure and have a new life. And so the exact same thing happened to me. Like, I don't know what I thought a spirit guide did, but I was really not expecting her to grab my hand and read my palm. And after she did, she told me where I could go to start my personal journey and find my personal treasure and all of these things, which was an acting class in Burbank that she recommended. I never went. When I say I was too scared of what would come after that, like I had this underlying conviction from the Holy Spirit and I just never went. Like, I just really didn't feel comfortable with it. And after that, when I say my life completely unraveled, I lost my job, my apartment. I moved back to Virginia. the depression kicked in, the addiction kicked in. Like, if I thought I was stuck and lost before and confused before, I was 10 times worse. And for the longest time, I could not figure out why, because I didn't understand what I had allowed into my mind, like the spiritual door that had been opened. Hosea says, "My people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge." Not a lack of effort or intention, not a lack of desire, is literally a lack of being made aware of something, of seeking out this information. And I had unknowingly adopted an ideology that was completely outside of God, one that God strictly forbid at that. And it wasn't through ritual or pills or potions, it wasn't through a ceremony, it was simply through reading a story. And when I say God put belt to ass, and please pardon me, Super Saints, I really need to emphasize how bad that season of discipline was. Like, it was no joke. So, no, not every story is witchcraft, but every story certainly has influence. And not every spiritual message leads to God. Some just sound like they do. If you're reading The Alchemist or anything like it, or anything for that matter, I wouldn't just ask, is this book inspiring, or focus on the feeling that it gives, if you're entertained or engaged with it. I would literally be asking, where is this leading me? What is the story training me to trust or believe in? Is this drawing me closer to God even, or replacing him? Because discernment isn't optional and ignorance is not an excuse. Not every gospel is the gospel. In my next video, I'm going to talk about the discipline I actually received after dabbling into the occult in more detail, and how that relates to the struggles I think the Black community is facing today as a whole. If you want to read more about my findings on Paulo Coelho, or you want a link to the article referenced in this video and some other resources that I actually found on him, check out my Substack. The link is below. If this video resonated with you, please let me know how in the comments. Like, I really love the engagement. If you want more conversations like this about faith, culture, and discernment, please subscribe. All right, guys, I will see you next week, friend.